is Scouting Radio during lockdown, during the COVID-19 lockdown. Justin Dawson with you once again, and bringing you another show. Now, before we kick off, listeners, if you are listening to this as an audio podcast, we do recommend that you take a look at our website, scoutingradio.com, where we will have links to our video podcasts and video streams, because these are very interactive videos that we're going to be doing in a couple of series with Colin Walker. We have the Ask Colin series. We're going to have the Walking in the Footsteps of BP. That's going to be a new series that's coming out on Scouting Radio soon. But we're also going to look at 100 historic Scout objects, and that's where we're kicking it off with our very own Scout historian. Well, we're going to call him our very own because he's been with Scouting Radio since day one, nearly. Colin Walker, the most world-renowned Scout historian. I'm going to make him blush now, but the most world-renowned Scout historian. If he has not got a Scout historic object, it's not a Scout object. Colin Walker, welcome along to Scouting Radio again.
Thank you, Justin, and it's wonderful to be back. And I just have to say, Justin, that we are not going to do 100 historic objects today.
No, we're not doing that. No, I'm confusing
what
myself.
What we're going to do today, listeners, is really something that Justin and I have discussed that we think is very apt for the times. We just very recently had the VE Day celebrations.
That's
and
right.
We've got the great example to the nation from Captain Tom, who the wartime veteran who's been recognised by the Prime Minister and by the Queen, now Sir Captain Tom. What an inspiration to everybody. I'd like to think he was a Scout. I've not heard that he was, but I think we'll make him an honorary Scout as well.
I think we could send him a Scouting Radio neckerchief or some badges as well. We just need to find out what his address is, but we'll get there.
We'll do that. So we're going to have a series, people, based on scouting in the Second World War. And it just happens that I have written a book on scouting in the Second World War. And so when you come to see this on the website, you'll see a picture of that book, because I'm sure Justin will put it there up on the screen for us all to see. So in the course of the war years, there was great examples of scouting service. And so I've got to rack through my memory as to where we're going to start with this, because we're not going to do it in chronological order. That would make no sense at all, because time really doesn't matter all this time afterwards. So I was thinking, right, let's pick an example that we can learn from, because one of the things that Justin and I have discussed before is when you're talking about Scouts at war, you invite some criticism, and I'm sure you've heard it all in the past, everybody, is that Scouting is the world's biggest peace organisation. What do we want to be talking about war for all the time? Because it estranges our Scouting brotherhood that were the other side in whatever war we're talking about. And I've had to live with this for a long, long time, because I say we're not gung-ho about war. What we're doing is we're talking about Scout service, and that needs to be recognised. And we've played our little part in that. We've got the National War Memorial, and this badge, you recall. Can we see the badge, Justin?
We can see the badge. It's the Lest We Forget badge, yes. The
Lest We Forget badge. And now, for the first time ever, we've actually got a memorial to all Scouts who gave their lives in service in all wars. All Scouts in all wars, not just the British Scouts, all Scouts in all wars. And that's at the National Arboretum. And if you've never been, that's a fantastic place to go. So I chose from all the things that happened that filled up my book on World War II, what should I start with? And I thought, well, we'll try and find something that most people won't have heard of, that has got a lot to tell them, a lot to tell us, a lot we can learn as Scouts from this story that I'm going to tell you now, which one of the reasons why it's so stunning is because history of war, the saying goes, is always written by the victors. So whatever war we're talking about, we hear the history of the war from the people that won it, not from the people that lost it. And so the people that won it are always the good guys, and the people that lost it are always the bad guys. And so we, particularly in the British Empire, are given to think, well, it was a terrible enemy. We were a just war, a terrible enemy, and we were the good guys. Well, stand by to have your socks blown off. That's all I can say, because that's what happened to me when I found out and researched this story, which centers in 1936-37, the National Socialist Party, Germany, and Hitler started their oppression of Jews in Germany and then in Austria. A few Germans and Austrians who, it has to be said, were mainly well-educated and from wealthy families, were able to escape early days because they were warned in enough time to be able to leave before the trouble really started. And they went and found new lives in different countries, but quite a lot came to England. And they were welcome. They were fleeing from Nazis, and we welcomed them, and they were assimilated into our life. And those that came from families that had scouts, well, they went and joined the local scout troop. And those that didn't come from families that had scouts, if they had children, encouraged their children to join scouting, because they knew all about scouting. And what better way can you have to assimilate in a nation than to send your children along to the local scouts? So a lot of those children of these refugees joined scouts. So everything went swimmingly until 1939, and the Second World War was declared. And our war leader, Churchill, had got no other option really but to arrange for the internment of all aliens. And that's what they were called. These were the people that came from Germany and Austria, fleeing Hitler, so they were Hitler's enemies, but they were aliens. And to be fair to Churchill, in rounding them up and putting them in internment camps, he was doing them a favour, because we in Britain had just lived through Dunkirk, and there wouldn't be many people who hadn't lost their uncle, father, brother, and there'll be lots and lots of bitter feeling against Germans. And there's a lot of historical fact about some of the things that we can't be too proud of that happened to German families living in Britain at that time. So for their own good as much as anything, Churchill rounded them up, and they were put into internment camp on the Isle of Man. And to be fair, it wasn't really a bad existence, because there's not a lot of space on the Isle of Man, so they used a holiday resort with a lot of hotels, and they put them all in hotels. They put some barbed wire around the hotels so that they couldn't go walk about wherever they wanted, but they could go for walk about from one hotel to another hotel, and they were looked after quite happily. So that continued, and then out of the blue in 1940, it was decided that the younger people, the younger men, aged, say, I don't know the exact limits, but we're going to say from 18 to say 25, it was decided that we should export these individuals to America and to Australia by ship. Now that sounds easy to say, but to get to Australia or America by ship, you've got to run the U-boat Menace. And quite a lot of Allied shipping was getting sunk every day, every week, between Britain and America and Britain and Australia. So it was a very, very risky thing to do. But nonetheless, that's what's happened. So I don't know anything about the American ship that went at all, but I know quite a lot about the ship that went to Australia. And this was called HMT DunHayera. Now, HMT stands for Hired Military Transport. And this was a cruise ship. And it was built to carry 350 passengers. And it left from Liverpool. Just 2 days previously, another ship left Liverpool bound for Canada, and it was sunk in mid-Atlantic. It was called the SS Arundora Star. And that was full of people from the Isle of Wight internment camp. And there was great loss of life. But those that were rescued 2 days later are back in Liverpool, and they're put on the DunHayera. The DunHayera now has got 2,542 passengers. We're talking about a cruise ship built for around 355 passengers, has now got 2,542 passengers. Nobody on the ship knew that it was going to Australia or what was going to happen to them when they got there. They just knew that they were going. Now, here's something very interesting, I think. The British government, from the outset of the war, had given pardon to prisoners in His Majesty's prisons if they agreed to join the forces, to join the war effort. So the prisons were emptied of those who were prepared to serve His Majesty. But they weren't allowed to join the ordinary British regiments that we're so proud of. They joined an organisation that was a part of the British Army called the Pioneer Corps. And so it just so happens that this ship was crewed by the Pioneer Corps, convicts, prisoners. It wasn't staffed, got a Royal Navy staff, but it just so happened that that Royal Navy staff, to a man, were anti-Semites. Now, that's not my opinion, Justin. We don't deal in opinion in history, do we? No. That was the opinion of the court martials that tried these people after the war for some of the offences that I'm going to tell you about now. So
before we continue, we have one listener comment asking, how long would it take for a boat to travel from the Isle of Man to Australia with that many passengers?
Well, I can tell you that my mother did it the other way around. She was born in Australia and she came to Britain from Australia on board ship, and it took 5 weeks.
Wow, 5 weeks with that many passengers. There was no social distancing on that ship, I can tell you.
Not at all. They didn't sleep in beds. They slept in hammocks going back almost to slave trade. So right. So once they got the voyage started, 2 days out, 2 torpedoes tracked by a U-boat, 2 torpedoes actually hit the DunHayera. But fortunately, the percussion caps didn't work, and so the ship wasn't blown out of the water and continued on its merry way. But first things that happened were that all of these young Jewish men, they had all their belongings taken from them because there was no room for their suitcases that they'd brought with them in these very cramped sleeping areas. So they were told that these belongings would be put into a hold and they would be returned to them when they disembarked. Well, the convicts of the Pioneer Corps ransacked the suitcases, took out anything of any value and threw the rest overboard. And it gets a lot worse, Justin. And again, this isn't my opinion, this is not hearsay, this is documented fact. Right. There was wanton cruelty. In the ship, the toilets are called the heads, and the sleeping accommodation is the distance from the heads. And there was a curfew whereby people could not leave the dormitory area after a certain time. A person was bayoneted because he was out in the corridor trying to get to the heads after the curfew time. Wow. Some individuals strew the corridor between the sleeping accommodation and the heads with broken glass. Wow. Now, can you just imagine what a hellhole that ship is? Yet, in the forecastle of the ship, a rover crew was formed. In the stern of the ship, a scout crew was formed. I can't tell you anything much about the scout crew, other than I know that one was formed, but I can tell you quite a lot about the rover crew. It was these young people talking together obviously came to realise that quite a few of them had got a common background, and that common background was scouting. And they were now of an age, because they were all over 17 on this ship, they were all of an age where there would be rovers. And so they formed a rover crew, and the name of the rover crew, rather surprisingly, was the DunHayera, the name of the ship, the DunHayera Rover Crew. And they met in the forecastle of the ship, and the captain of the ship was the honorary RSL, Rover Scout Leader. So he at least was one of the good guys, but he didn't know what was going on, I don't think. So as the ship got nearer and nearer, they realised in the end that they were bound for Australia. The DunHayera Rover Crew decided that come thick and thin, they would try and stay together. And probably rather by good luck than judgment, that's exactly what happened, because they were taken to the Hay internment camp, New South Wales, built in the desert by the Australian government as a prisoner of war camp, especially for these internees, because the British had told them that they were sending prisoners of war. Now, these internees from the Isle of Man, previously from escaping the Nazi horrors of Germany and Austria, they were no danger to anybody when they were in Britain. Mm-hmm. They were haters of the Third Reich. And now they're in Australia, they're even less danger to anybody. But they're locked up in what was built as a prisoner of war camp. But the one good thing was all of the rover crew were in the same hut in this built prisoner of war camp, now called an internment camp. And one of the good things about the fact that the British said that these people were prisoners of war was that the Australians had built the prisoner of war camp and arranged it to be run under the Geneva Convention for Prisoners of War. So I was researching this for my book on the Second World War on the internet, and I came across the fact that the Jewish Holocaust Museum in Russell Square, London, Alleluia, had got the logbook belonging to the DunHayera Rover Crew. Now, let's just recap. When it was on board the ship, it was called the DunHayera Rover Crew. Now it's at Hay Internment Camp, New South Wales. We've combined the two names, so we've got the DunHayera Rover Crew. And the Rover Crew decided it would make itself very high profile, and they knew that they would be visiting people from under the Geneva Convention to see to their welfare. So they advertised themselves around the camp as much as they possibly could. And it was just very happy very happy coincidence that a scout commissioner for that part of Australia, Riverina area of New South Wales, a Reverend Twigg, was a scout commissioner.
Right.
So he gets to the prisoner of war camp, and he gets to the camp and he finds that there's an active rover crew. So he makes it his business to talk to these lads and to hear their story. And he, of course, is absolutely disgusted. Not only him, but quite a few other people along the way, good thinking people in Britain and in Australia, were putting a lot of pressure on the British government that something must be done about this absolute travesty. And so they sent out a member of the Home Office, who just happened to be a Jew himself, an ex-military gentleman, and he got on the scene, and immediately he could see that this was terrible. Questions were asked in the House of Commons, and Churchill actually admitted that this was one of the biggest mistakes of the war, that these young men should have been treated like this. And so they were released from the internment camp, and they were given two options. One option is they could stay in Australia, and the other option was that they could come back to Britain if they wanted. A boat would be found. And so of all of those 2,500 people, it was roughly a 50% split. Half of them, despite the treatment that they'd had under the British in getting to Australia, wanted to come back home and wanted nothing more than to join the British forces to defeat the Nazis.
Wow.
The other half of the people decided to stay in Australia. And the split was 50% down the DunHayera Rover Crew. And those rovers that stayed in Australia, they joined the second Shepparton Rover Crew. So they remained as rovers and they stayed in Australia. But one half of them came back to England. Now, if you look this up on the internet, and there's a lot there, you will find that one of the most common statements that's used in connection with this whole debacle is that this ship full of people was the biggest infusion into Australian life of expertise that Australia had ever had. Because as I said to you to start with, most of these people were very well educated and came from families that had got some money, and so they were able to escape in the first place. And when they went to Australia, those that stayed in Australia became politicians, leaders of industry, leaders of commerce, and they had a big, big effect on life in Australia. The half that came to England, ditto. Amazingly, and I can't get over this, they came back because they wanted to join the British Army, British forces. So on the dock, when they landed, there was a recruiting sergeant waiting to enlist them and give them the King shilling to join the forces. Just have a guess at which area of the forces they ended up in.
Would it be Navy by any chance?
No.
No?
It was the Pioneer Corps.
Oh, wow.
The Pioneer Corps, made up of ex-convicts who had maltreated them so badly on the way out. However, because of the quality of these young men and their education, they didn't stay in the Pioneering Corps for very long. And some of them became senior officers. One of them in particular, Peter Eden, became an intelligence officer in the British Army, quite a high-ranking intelligence officer. And for his services to British intelligence, he became a lord. Now, wonders of wonders, just yesterday, because this wasn't available when I was researching my book on the Second World War, I was listening to Peter Eden live talking on the computer, on a podcast, talking about his time on the DunHayera. Lord, as he is now, 98 years old.
Wow.
So another Sir Captain Tom, but Lord Peter Eden, 98 years old. He was last year, and I haven't heard that he's died, so I'm hoping he's still alive.
And hopefully will make his 100th birthday.
Yes. So Lord Peter Eden, and now let's be absolutely right about this. I am not saying that Lord Peter Eden was one of the DunHayera Rovers. Mm-hmm. But he was on the ship, and he was in the internment camp in Hay, New South Wales. And so he was talking just after the war, because the Imperial War Museums had a great thing where they wanted to get as many people as possible to put their memories on to tape, as it was then, before they got too old. And so that has been resurrected, and that's been put onto the internet now. And so you can listen to him, and his story will bear out what I'm saying to you. So this is a story, above all of the story, it rivals what the Rovers did in Changi. But this is a story. In my book on the Second World War, we've got instances of Rover service in prisoner of war camps, the Stalags, run by the Nazis in Germany. We've got instances of rovers in prisoner of war camps in the East, in the Japanese War. And now I'm telling you about British prisoners of war, because they were under our care, that were in our prisoner of war camps and mistreated. but still the rover ideal of service. I went to the museum in Russell Square, and I was able to read this logbook, but I was sworn into not being able to photograph it or to copy it. I have to say I haven't got a photograph of the cover, but I stuck to my words. But I read the contents of the logbook, and this was a rover crew like all other rover crews. It was looking at ways to serve, to do things to help the life of all the other people in the prisoner of war camp. And then they lived their life accordingly. So they came back to England. Half of them came back to England and went into the forces and made a mark serving the nation. So there, to start off our series of scouting in the Second World War, we've got the most bizarre story that I can possibly tell you. But it's a story of lockdown like perhaps no other lockdown. Can you remember? Can you imagine being in that ship?
It's a bizarre story. I've actually never heard of it, Colin. But a couple of our listeners have asked a couple of questions, and while you have been talking, I have also been on my second monitor in studio reading up on this. There is actually a movie. Actually, yes, it is a movie. 3 hours 20 minutes of drama war called DunHayera Boys. And when was this produced? Actually, I'm just trying to find out.
Quite some time ago, available on Netflix.
Is it on Netflix? Right, okay. So that answers that question. But again, the BBC also had, back in 2010, so we're talking 10 years ago, 70 years on after the notorious voyage.
So on all of these resources that we've got, you are going to find all the evidence you need to be able to appreciate the fact that the story is as I've told you. But you will not be reading about the rover crew. Mm-hmm. The rover crew, I'm fortunate to say, came from accidents and coincidences in my research. And that led me down tracks that enabled me to get to the information. But if you go onto the internet, there are 3 books, I think, now that have been written about the DunHayera boys. There's 2 films, I think, that's been made about them. But they're about the whole thing. This was a ship full of 2,500 people. As far as I can see, apart from having their things stolen, the boys in the DunHayera Rover Crew, the DunHayera Rover Crew, whilst on board the ship, weren't subjected to some of the worst excesses that some of the other people had to endure. But after the war, there was court-martial. One of the officers of the ship was actually sent to prison, and the British government in 1946 paid out £36,000.
Which was a lot of money at that time.
That would be way over £1 million today. Mm-hmm. And acknowledgement of the wrong that was done to these people. But the central message is that despite the lockdown, the spirit of scouting shone through. These people came through, and they continued with the rover motto of service. What a story.
And I wonder now, is there any recollections by Scout Australia? Is it acknowledged by the Scout Australia that they know about this rover crew, or is there any historical...
They certainly know about the rover crew. After the war, there were reunions, and even up to quite recent times, not just reunions of the rover scouts, but of everybody on board the ship. And they're celebrated in Australia because, as I said to you, they recognize the fact that these people were the biggest infusion of talent into the nation. Mm-hmm. And so the families the young men that went out and stayed in Australia and got families in Australia, they are regarded as national heroes in a way.
Yes. Like only recently we were talking with one of our fond Scout reporters, Stephen Kennedy, and I joined up with the Ashmore Scout group in Scouts Australia for one of their virtual Scout meetings. But they had just celebrated is the wrong word. They had just marked and Anzac Day over in Australia as well. So Colin, in Australia, Rover Scouts is very active still as part of the association. So I'm sure there's a lot of Rover crews that will be interested in this story.
Absolutely. If I had my Rover Scout shirt on, the Thane Rover Crew shirt, instead of my association shirt, which you see here today, you would see my Rover ribbons. Mm-hmm. Well, so I'm going to put Justin on the spot now, listeners. So what colour are the Rover ribbons, Justin?
The three colours, Colin, which is red. Now you might correct me on the yellow, but red, yellow and green.
Absolutely, which was the three sections of the Scout movement when Rovering was formed. Green for Scouts, yellow for Cubs, and red for Rovers. Right. When I went to Brownsea Island as part of the dawn ceremony, the sunrise ceremony in 2007, when Scouting Radio pulled off a unique feat of plotting the sunrise ceremonies across the world as they happened, and I was the reporter on Brownsea for Radio Scouting. I met up with Michael Baden-Powell, who is the patron of the Thane Rover Crew, and a young man who was his guest, who was a rover, an Australian rover, in uniform. And so I asked him about his shoulder knot, because it didn't have three colours. It had four colours.
All right.
Right. So this young man made no more to do, but he took off his knot and he gave it to me. So I am the only member of the Thane Rover Crew with a shoulder knot that's got four colours in.
Well, I'm curious to know what is the fourth colour then, and why is there a fourth colour?
Well, there's four colours because we cast the rover knot in Aspic in 1918 when Rover Scouts were formed. Very few Rover Patrols, as they were called, in 1918, but there was some, and then a lot more in 19, and they were the colours of the existing sections of the Scout movement. Mm-hmm. Right. So later on, when more sections were added, that didn't matter because we were going on the fact that when rovering started, there were just three sections.
Yeah.
Now, in Australia, Rover Scouting, as you rightly say, is a live issue. It's not cast in aspect. So we've got a fourth section in Australia called
Kias.
Joey's.
Joey's.
In New Zealand.
Yes. I apologise to all my Kiwi friends there. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Joey's.
So the fourth section, the fourth colour is the colour of the Joey's. So why not? And it's very. We'll perhaps have to show you a picture of it, because the way it is worn in Australia is the Rover hat, the Baden-Powell wide awake hat, which Rovers wore, had a little hat badge in silver with the letters RS.
Yes.
Well, the Rover knot on the shoulder had that same hat badge, RS, pinning the ribbons to the shirt. So it's headed RS. And it's a little bit thicker because the ribbons are folded over, aren't they? So they're double anyway. Yes. And then there are four colours. So I'm rather proud of that. That's nice little work.
I think this whole topic, Colin, is going to open up a lot of questions, and I'm hoping that a lot of our listeners in Australia will come back and say, yes, we know about this story. Is there any artifacts in museums in Liverpool for the DunHayera?
No, I've only found this one museum in London that's actually got any artifacts at all, which makes me think that must have been brought back by one of those that returned to Britain. But I'm quite sure that there's a network of museums, one of which Michael Baden-Powell is associated with in Australia, in Victoria. Although I've never been to that museum, I have seen lots of photographs, and they've got lots, for instance, they've got lots of artifacts relating to rovers in Changi Jail. So right. I'm sure there will be something. But the only artifact that we would give our eye teeth for, Justin, wouldn't we, was it is recorded in the logbook that a member of the crew made a special woggle for the crew, emblazoned with DunHayera Rovers on the Woggle.
Right.
Now, I would like, so if any listener is listening in Australia and has a picture of that Woggle, and I don't expect to ever end up having the Woggle, but if I could just have a picture of it, I would be very pleased to put it in my archive and use. I'm hoping, Justin, that when this program goes out live, it can incorporate the front cover of the DunHayera logbook.
Absolutely.
And also, I've got a photograph showing the DunHayera absolutely loaded to the gills with passengers on the deck, showing just how overcrowded it was. If that two of those torpedoes had gone off 2 days out, there would have been mayhem. There would not, absolutely not, have been enough lifeboats for 2,400 people.
Wow.
Impossibility.
Yes.
So that would have been carnage.
We have to also bring up a comment from one of our listeners here, Colin, that they say, yes, we love your Scouting Milestones page, which is at the moment really archived on the Scouting Radio website under history.scoutingradio.com. But a lot of people are saying, now that we have the powers that be, can we have all of Colin's articles made into this type of format where we can talk through it? And I think over time, yes, there's a big series to go. Have we got enough time to do it?
Well, that's very kind, and this perhaps would be the best way, because I've got a huge confession to make here, and I'm quite sure that it won't have passed the notice of the more avid readers of the webpage, Justin, which you very kindly allowed me to put onto your site in its original glory. Not being high tech, I couldn't manage that myself. I tried very hard. But I had a very good friend at the time that I was writing in scouting called Mike Riles, who was an amateur, but a very, very meticulous web page writer. And he transformed all of my articles into what at the time was a very, very forward example of what a web page should be. And it incorporated, for the technical minded, which Justin is going to tell me is totally out of date, it included not just HTML markup language, which I could barely cope with, not really very well at all, but also JavaScript and some of the other more modern things that did wonderful things. And so when Mike had to leave because he'd got other things to do, I couldn't continue, because I just couldn't write it to the standard that he did. So what I did, I left it cast in Asprey. So nothing has been added or taken away from the website that you see on the Scouting Radio website to when I wrote the last thing over 10 years ago.
It is over. Do you know what, Colin? We're going to scare people. It's over 10 years ago. It's over 15 years ago, because, you know.
Years ago. But I wasn't going to give up on Scout history, was I?
No.
So what I did instead was that I wrote the books. So I've now completed my 12th published book, the last one being the very one we've been talking about today, Scouts at War, Second World War. So I've got and I've written numerous articles in all sorts of places. But if you say to me, well, what are the advantages of the website over the books, and what are the advantages of the books over the website? The website would win every day. Because I don't know if you remember this, Justin, but I wrote a blog. And the blog was all about incoming information coming into me, which comes in every day, even now. And just 2 days ago, there was a most amazing thing where a lady from Sunderland wrote to me to say that she'd read the website on your website. She had read about the world's first scout camp. Now, what scout camp was she talking about?
Roundsea Island.
No.
Oh, she's talking about Holmshire, was she?
No.
No. Okay. I'm going to stop asking questions here. Yeah, go on.
Right. Well, we have the hoary old argument as to whether Brownsea was a scout camp or not. Obviously, it wasn't, because scouts hadn't had the law and the promise until January 1908. Obviously, it was, because Baden-Powell designed the note paper, which said the scout camp's Brownsea. But we know in reality there weren't scouts. Humshoff, August 1908, definitely was a scout camp of enrolled and committed members. However, in May 1908, Baden-Powell had observed scouts practicing scouting on Wimbledon Common. And one of these scout patrols, called the Kangaroos, he suggested should be a demonstration crew. And this demonstration crew were dressed up in white pullovers so they could be easily visible on a black and white photograph. And the Scout Association took postcard images of them doing scouting things like weaving a mattress. And they were used in giving scout troops some idea of what scouting was all about in 1908. But then in the north of the country, Colonel Vaux of the Vaux brewing family, who was a friend of Baden-Powell's, because they were in the same regiment, same army regiment. Baden-Powell went to see him in 1907 and told him about the fact that he was going to start a scouting, a new organization for boys. And Colonel Vaux was a great philanthropist, and he was running a boys' club for waifs and strays. It was called the Lambton Street Waifs and Strays Boys' Club. And it was mainly for newspaper vendors, because the waifs and strays earned money for their families by selling the newspapers. And this club was for them. And so Colonel Vaux paid for the building in Lambton Street, and he paid 2 army officers to be the Boys' Youth Club leaders. When he heard about Baden-Powell starting scouting, overnight he turned his boys' club into a scout troop. I don't know an exact date for that, but it would have been late 1907 or early 1908. Super. Okay. So Baden-Powell suggested that he formed a demonstration patrol, which was called the Peewits. And the Kangaroos from Wimbledon Common should come and camp with the Peewits at Colonel Vaux' home at Grindon Lodge near Sunderland. Well, in the farm next door, which was called Grindon Farm. And that's what happened. And Baden-Powell visited that camp in May 1908, and there was a report of it in the Headquarters Gazette of the day, but also in the Sunderland Echo, where there was talk the week before it happened in the Sunderland Echo, because I went to their archives and researched. It said, "We are going to send a photographer and a reporter to the camp, so we'll be letting you know what happened." So at that point, I rushed down to Sunderland Echo archive to see if I could find this photograph, because, Justin, if this photograph was found, it would be the first and only photograph of the first ever documented scout camp. What do you think about that?
That's insane.
Incredible. So I searched and searched and searched, and I found the article, the follow-up article, where the camp was written about, but no photograph.
No photo. Right.
2 days ago, thanks to your website, on which my website now resides, a lady wrote to me from Sunderland.
Don't tell me she has a photo.
Yeah, Mr. Walker. I was delighted to find your article on the camp at Grindon Farm, because my husband's grandfather was at the camp.
No.
And we know he was at the camp because I have here a photograph. And on the back of the photograph, his grandfather has written, Grindon Farm Camp, 1908. Now, the only people that know that this camp was at Grindon Farm and not at Grindon Grange or Grindon Lodge were the people who were there.
There, yes.
So this photograph, which I shall send you a copy of so you can put it on the website, shows a bell tent, and sticking out the flap of the vertical flap of the bell tent are 3 boys' heads. And this lady's husband's grandfather, as a boy, is there as the middle boy in the row. Now, on another day and another time, I'll be able to tell you about another boy that was there at that camp as well. But so thanks to the power of the internet, we now have a photograph from the world's first ever documented scout camp that most people know didn't even happen.
And this is where we love the Scout history shows on Scouting Radio. A lot of people say, how do you get in contact with Colin? How do you buy books and everything? You can find out more through scoutingradio.com. We will put you in touch with Colin. If you think you have even documents like this that you were just about to throw out because it was, you know, don't throw them out, for God's sake. And the amount of people that are probably cleaning up their attic and loft at the moment because they have nothing better to do during COVID-19. If you find any interesting Scout historic items or pictures of boys wearing knickers and, you know, you think that this might be important, do let us know.
Well, if I could just make an appeal here. My big project in the lockdown is to continue my researches on British Rover Crews. Now, this started with a collection of about 6 or 7 Rover Crew badges. And then through the Badgers Club of Great Britain, at that time, they had a little archive. And I think we got up to about 25 Rover Crew badges. And then I bought and photographed collections of friends and in various archives. And I think we got up to about 400 Rover Crews that we knew. Most of them didn't have badges, but they had shoulder tape saying such and such a Rover Crew, but they all had to be documented. So at the start of the lockdown, I thought, well, what I'm going to do is I've got runs of Rover Crew magazines. Rover World was a magazine, the Rover Rag was a magazine, Rovering was a magazine. And of course, there was the Scout Association's, the Scouter magazine that always carried pages of rovers. So going through those, page at a time, every mention of a Rover Crew logged onto the database with the date of the magazine in which it appeared. And it might say that a boy was awarded a medal, or that a leader got a long service award, or joy of joys, there might be a little article about that Rover Crew. Well, we're now up to 4,500 names of British Rover Crews on my database, wow, which is unheard of. Did I say 4,500 pounds? 4,500? No, I'm sorry, I'm getting carried away with myself. I know from the May 1934 Scouter magazine that carried a review of the census of that year year in 1934, there were 4,500 Rover Crews. That's where I've got 4,500 from. I have got listed on my database now, amazingly, 2,500 British Rover Crews. So I'm appealing to your listeners. If you have got family members who were in Rover Crews, if you could please ask them about them and then forward their comments to me. Any information, the name of the Rover Crew, the Rover Scout leader, if they had a badge, if they didn't have a badge, if they had a neckerchief, what its colours was, but as little as just the name would be tremendous. Would
mean a lot, yes.
Would mean a great deal. And because this has never been documented before, British Scout Association abolished rovering in 1967 in favour of combining that age group into Venture Scouts, and then Venture Scouts has now become Explorer Scouts, and Network Scouts are much the same age as Rovers used to be. And somehow or another, the concept of rovering, because it got to be abolished, got to be put in the back burner and something that Scouting wasn't quite proud about. It sort of changed its attitude in the last couple of years because we had 100 years of Rover Scouting. And the rest of the world did not abolish Rover Scouting. And Rover Scouting is alive and well in most countries in the world other than Britain. But I think we now have a more reasoned attitude to what Rover Scouting achieved than used to be the case. So I'm trying to document that, and any help your readers can give me, particularly if you are inclined in as a lot of us are, in the collecting mode. One of the best sources that I've found are the annual reports of Scout districts and Scout counties. So if you've got a father or a grandfather that was involved in Scouting and they kept these reports, then what you're going to find is a list of the Rover crews in that district, in that county. That would be absolutely invaluable.
As they say, one person's trash is another person's treasure, Colin. This is type of things that people don't even realise, that it could look like a load of scribbles as a diary that someone might accidentally throw out. And this could be the most valuable information for Colin. And if you think you have something like this, please do get in contact. Our details is going to be scrolling across the bottom of the screen, and we will also have, you can also visit our website, www.scoutingradio.com, where you will find a link to Scout history. And I think over time, we will start making a lot more videos and a lot more audio clips of different Scout historic events. But you know what? It keeps on changing, you know, and that's the beauty of it. And as we get updates, and it's like we are little Scout detectives. Well, certainly Colin is, and I don't know how his wife puts up with him going, hooray, I'm going to Sunderland next week. What for? Oh, I just need to find a photo. She must think he's absolutely insane. But there we go. You know, that's why they married. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Colin, it has been a pleasure as always to have you on. We will be continuing this series, and if you have any questions, do get in contact on the website. We are looking forward to doing the 100 items of Scout history, and also footsteps in the founder of Baden Powell and where he was. Because Colin has an absolute encyclopedia of photos from all over the globe. And we're going to try and make virtual tours of these different locations, which some people across the world will never actually get to see.
We're going to start with Gil Wilson.